Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So Madeline told me that I need to do a video on clearing malfunctions, and so we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that with pistols as well as with rifles. So we've got both of them out today. Don't have any snap caps for the rifle. I do have a 4-year-old behind the camera, so if you hear any odd noises, that's kind of what's going on. Make sure and like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so, and now let's jump into it and go over kind of the first of really 3 different basic types of malfunctions. First malfunction we're going to deal with is a click no bang, right? So these are very common, more common reasons that these happen, or the most common reasons that these happen is that the magazine didn't get seated in all the way. And so even if you have your magazine gets pushed in, and even if you get the first round into the chamber, what ends up happening is that you'll go to fire, that round will get cycled out, and then the next round is actually still in the magazine. It actually didn't get put into the chamber. So once that chamber cycles back, it doesn't actually seat it. So the easiest way to deal with these and the most reliable is to do what's called a tap rack drill. And you want to do a tap rack drill both on pistols and on rifles, or on pistols and rifles. Sorry, I've got a 4-year-old like trying to talk, and so it's kind of somewhat distracting. But the tap rack drill is really just, you're going to reseat that magazine. I'm going to roll my hand over, and I'm going to go ahead and rack the slide again. That's going to take care of that issue. Now, this takes care of a couple issues. One is this takes care of the issue if, let's say, that my tap rack drill is because when I tap it and I rack it, it actually just was a slide lock not coming back on the final round. And so if you're shooting fast enough, sometimes you'll miss the feel of that, even though the feel is a little bit different on that final round. If you're shooting really fast, sometimes you overlook that feel, even if you're real experienced. And now if you're not experienced, then you probably can't quite tell the feel yet, but as you get more experience, you certainly will. Now, so that tap rack takes care of that. And okay, now all of a sudden I know that I'm out of ammo because my slide is back. I can now drop that magazine, get a new one in there, and get back into battery. The other reason that it happens is sometimes you just have bad ammunition, and that's probably more, I don't want to say more common. It's more common in experienced shooters. With less experienced shooters, this is certainly more common where the magazine didn't get seated all the way. But for more experienced shooters, again, more common is that it's actually just bad ammunition. And we're seeing a lot of that lately with primers being kind of a little bit tougher from, especially some of the Turkish primers that are coming in for reloading and stuff like that. Those primer cups, the manufacturing tolerances and the quality control had gone down because they're trying to catch up with orders. And so because of that, we're seeing that issue. Now, I'm not seeing that issue near as much in hammer-fired guns as we are in like striker-fired guns. So, and one fix that people do in Glocks is they put a 6.5-pound striker-fire or striker spring in there because it helps eliminate that issue. And then they're actually pretty strong. They can start igniting rifle primers at that point in time. So not that that's advisable to do, but that's kind of why it's done. So that being said, let's talk about this with a rifle. Okay, so in doing this drill with the rifle and with a rifle, the rifle is the exact same motion, right? And so this is an immediate action drill. So instead of bringing it back here right in close, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go ahead and do it. Left hand, cycle that bolt, and then move forward. So there's really nothing more to it than that. It's a pretty simple one. Now, one thing that tends to happen with like AR-15 specifically is if these are 30-round magazines and you load them all the way to 30 rounds, a lot of times they won't seat properly because the bolt is forward, and so there's a lot of spring tension on there, and people really struggle to get that seated. So that's why I load my magazines to 29 rounds instead of to 30, specifically for that reason. So again, just hit the magazine as hard as you can and cycle that bolt. Okay, so the second type of malfunction that we're really likely to deal with is what's called a stovepipe, and these can be a little bit more prone on certain guns, specifically striker-fired guns, specifically Glocks. This is one thing Glocks are real notorious about doing, especially you'll hear people saying that you're limp wristing it, just because you get a stovepipe doesn't mean you're limp wristing it, but it is indicative of problems with limp wristing it if you're getting stovepipe after stovepipe after stovepipe, so keep that in mind. Glocks, the way that they cycle, just for some reason that grip angle and everything seems to be real conducive to these happening. Now, there's a couple ways that you can deal with this. Now, one of the ways is to do a tap rack drill. It's actually the old way that I was taught to do it, and it's not actually a way that I'm a fan of anymore. What's actually a better option now is to reach over the top of the slide and rack your slide, but when you rack your slide, you're actually going to hit that with your fingers, and so you're actually going to move that back at the same time. So you're really not looking for a full slide rack because you've actually already got that bullet in there, so we're really not trying to get another bullet partially in there because then we're going to end up causing a double feed. So really what I want to do is I want to partially kind of move that slide back at the same time while I let my fingers rip that bullet out of there. So you can see now we got a nice brand new snap cap loaded up in there. So really, again, it doesn't matter where it's at. We're coming across the top, and we're just doing kind of a half cycle on our firearm. And sorry, I have my safety on, the half cycle on the firearm to get that out of there. The thing about stovepipes is you got to realize that when I have a stovepipe come across, I can see my stovepipe either on the top or on the side as I'm looking down. So I can diagnose this before I get into it. So I'm not having to do anything. I don't need to tap rack because I see the stovepipe right there. So just slide my hand over the top and do my partial rack, right? Now, you can do a full rack, but again, so when you do a full rack, you tend to actually, you can cause a double feed on the next one because that round that's going in there is not fully seated, and so if it doesn't grip the extractor and eject that second round that's actually going into the chamber right then, what'll end up happening is that you'll end up pushing another bullet up into there, you'll end up causing a double feed, and you'll have to do the next drill that we're going to talk about. Now, as far as stovepipes on rifles are somewhat existent, but they're cleared differently. A stovepipe on a rifle is actually going to be cleared the exact same way that we would clear a double feed on a rifle, whereas it's a little bit different on a pistol. So before we get into that, let's go to double feeds on the pistol, and we'll talk about exactly what the double feeds are. So, but keep in mind, with the rifle, there's really only two types because double feeds and stovepipes are going to be cleared the same way. Okay, so this is a classic double feed. Let me get this a little bit closer to the camera so you can see exactly what's going on here. So classic double feed, in this case, it's a little bit more difficult to recreate these. Sometimes you'll have this a little bit more aggressive. So what this is that you basically got two bullets going into the same hole, and that doesn't work. So when you have it like this, you have one bullet that's completely seated and the other bullet that's trying to come up into it. That is basically what we've recreated today. Sometimes it can actually pick up two bullets and try to get them in there if it wasn't able to fully extract one. So sometimes you'll get this if it's a failure to extract. Sometimes you just end up with this malfunction. ARs tend to be a little bit more prone to this malfunction. And the way to fix this malfunction with a pistol is there's your immediate action drill. And the old way of teaching this was what's called lock, rip, rack, replace, which is what we teach for beginner level classes. And what that is it's lock your bolt back, rip your magazine out. A lot of times your magazine will end up needing to be ripped out because with that bullet, see how that bullet's sticking forward? So that bullet sometimes will actually hold the magazine up and not allow the magazine to drop free. So that's why we say rip. You've got to actually rip that magazine out. And then what we're going to do is if we only have one magazine, so let's say this was our conceal and carry gun, we're not carrying a spare, I'm going to go ahead and hold that in my pinky there. I'm going to rack with my gun aimed up at the sky, right? Because I want to use gravity to help get this out. Both I want gravity fighting this way and this way down. So I'm going to have it kind of at an angle. So rack, and then replace. So it means I'm going to stick that magazine right back in, go ahead and get my gun back in action, and I'm ready to go. Okay, so that's how to clear a double feed for a pistol. Now, that's for a basic level. And as you get more advanced, then at that point in time, it's a little bit different because we don't necessarily need to do the rack. The problem is, and the reason that I'm a big fan of doing the rack is because it's not really that fast to have to take the time to diagnose it, because then we have to actually enter into our OODA loop, right, and decide what's going on. But if I just have immediate action that I'm always going to rack, I no longer have to decide, right? I'm not going through that OODA loop multiple times. I make the decision, okay, it's a double feed. Now I go through and do my immediate action drill. If I have to make a decision in that I'm looking at it and I want to put this back and I want to rack it once and then check and see if it's clear, then I'm going through another OODA loop, and then if it's not clear, then I'm going to rack it again or rack it again. So it's easier just to go rack and replace that magazine in there, go forward and fire my gun. Now, as far as dealing with that same malfunction with an AR-15, it is a very similar drill, but we're not going to do the rack. And let me kind of get into this why. So immediately go here, and what I get is I get a mushy trigger, right? So that's what's going to end up, that's what this is going to feel like. It's going to end up feeling like I have a mushy trigger. It's not going to feel like a normal trigger pull. It's not going to be a click, no bang. It's going to be something's wrong, okay? So immediately, the old Army way was doing sports or O sports, right? So I can immediately observe and look into it. But the fact is that I know what that trigger feels like. I don't really need to look at it. And so I know what my last round feels like, so I don't really need to look at it to see if it's a magazine issue. So I can go ahead and drop my magazine out because, again, I know what that feels like. Now, if you're left-handed, you do actually have a little bit of an advantage here because left-handed people can see into their chamber without moving anything. So left-handed does have a little bit of an advantage here on an AR platform, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and drop my magazine out, and you can put this wherever you need to, right? Suck it back in a magazine holster or whatever and clear your malfunction. So it's a matter of clearing it out. And again, rack does seem to work really well. It's a little bit slower, but really what'll happen more times than not is that you're gonna end up seeing that magazine. When you pull that out, those bullets are gonna come out with it. So when you see 1 or 2 bullets come out with it, I can just simply look, get this back in, and then go. So I don't have to actually make that decision to rack. The reason we do it with the pistol as opposed to the rifle is because it's so fast to do it on a pistol, it's slower to go through the OODA loop. On the rifle, you're talking about a longer bolt and more of an action, right? Because we're talking about a two-handed action now all of a sudden. It's a little bit more work to do that racking operation. So it's easier than for me to kind of look at it and follow what's going on. So I want to be able to see, okay, so now I've cleared it. Okay, cool, I can get my gun back in action, and I'm ready to go. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. That's the reason that we do it slightly different on the rifle versus the pistol. Now, because a double feed and a stovepipe are effectively cleared and handled the same way on your rifle, right? So that's why we only have 2 procedures. We either have immediate action of cap rack, or we know, hey, I've got a double feed, I gotta get that magazine out of there and get a new one in there. There is an argument for just dropping the magazine every time whenever you have that mushy trigger, because a mushy trigger oftentimes will feel like the bolt is being held back by the magazine being empty. So there's an argument to just go ahead, drop that out of there, get my new magazine in there, and go forward, right? So keep that in mind. It's a 6-to-1, half a dozen to the other thing, so it's certainly not something to kind of dork out on and really spend a lot of time dwelling over. The bottom line is train and practice, and you'll be okay regardless of which method you use, whether you want to just go ahead and rack, or whether you want to go ahead and try to put a little bit of a OODA loop thought into it, right, and go through the process of, is this clear or not? The speed is a negligible thing. You're going to be fastest at whatever one you train. So focus on which one you want to spend your time training with. Guys, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure and like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and we'll catch y'all later.